Welcome to Mending Piece by Piece, a podcast dedicated to helping you mend piece by piece after experiencing loss. I'm your host, Linda Falasco, a therapist with over 30 years of experience specializing in loss and grief and a lifetime of lived experience. I will start by sharing my personal story of trauma, loss, and grief, and will also include honest interviews with others who have experienced loss and who have found strength and growth afterwards. So here we go, giving a voice to trauma, loss, and grief as we learn together to mend, even if it's piece by piece. It was April 1st, and I was walking to the cash register at CVS when I was stopped dead in my tracks. Right in front of me was a picture of Kurt Cobain on the cover of Life magazine. It said, Kurt Cobain, 30 years later, what he and Nirvana left behind. I was frozen and could not move for what seemed like hours, but I'm sure it was a mere seconds. When I was able to finally move, I began to peel my eyes off the cover, and slowly I looked around and looked behind me to make sure I wasn't in anyone's way, and also to make sure that people weren't staring at me. I slowly walked up to the cover, and at first, I just touched it. And then I picked up the magazine. I could not open it. I just was staring at the cover, and my eyes were glued on 30 years later. I instantly flashed back to 30 years ago and the phone conversation that I had with Jeff. We talked at length about Kurt Cobain's death and also about a childhood friend of ours who had recently died by suicide. I know that we were talking for a long time about this, and we also were talking about why would someone do this? And you may be wondering, where am I going with this? Or why am I even talking about this today? What's the big deal? Well, for me, it is a big deal. I was frozen for a moment in the realization that almost 30 years had gone by since I lost my middle brother, Jeff, to suicide. Almost 30 years have gone by since I last talked to my brother. I was holding this magazine in my hand, and I was gently touching the picture and tracing the words 30 years later, and started to wonder, was that conversation a clue and I missed it? Was there more to that conversation than just talking about these tragic losses? Was Jeff trying to tell me something? Did he tell me something? And I missed it. I knew I had to get out of that headspace and come back to the present. And it was hard because I was at a war inside with a part of me that still was searching for answers and needing to know more, and yet a deep yearning to just hear his voice again. Just another part of me just wanting to stay in 1994, but yet the other side was begging to come back to 2024. I shook my head to try to get myself back to the present and to stop the thoughts. I looked around and I brought my attention to things around me that I could see. I took a few deep breaths, and hurriedly I put the cover back, the magazine cover back, and I walked up to the cashier to ring out. But throughout that day and throughout this month of April, my thoughts still floated back to me being frozen in the store and the thoughts of the conversation with Jeff. More thoughts have been floating around my head, like, what have we learned since Kurt Cobain's death and Jeff's death 30 years ago? Have I learned anything since then? Are we doing any better as a society, dealing with depression, anxiety, mental illness in general, and suicide? Is it any easier for men like my brother and Kurt to say that they're struggling to get help? So, what has changed in the last 30 years? I can say there's been changes over the last 30 years with mental health and suicide, but not enough. First change that I've noticed is the stigma around mental health has decreased somewhat. There are more open conversations about it, and we see commercials advertising medicine on a regular basis for depression and anxiety. So it's normalizing this in some way for many. But with that being said, there is still stigma in general around mental health and suicide, especially for men. With men being raised to be strong and resilient, with the boys don't cry attitude, this discourages them to seek mental health help. So many men are still suffering in silence and isolation. This has not changed. And I wonder, would Kurt or Jeff feel comfortable today getting help? I'm not sure they would. What else is different? Well, we're currently in a mental health crisis, especially among our youth, and we have very limited resources to help. People are struggling to find quality mental health care and often met with long waiting lists, especially if they're trying to use their insurance. Even here in a populated area, the Philadelphia area, we have a lot of resources. But when it comes to mental health, there's a shortage of availability for individuals to get quality services. And in some areas, rural areas, it's very limited, and they have very few resources available to them, which will put people at risk. We still lack funding for research around suicide. We need community resources because they're limited. And we need more community supports to help those in need. I have seen over 30 years, like I said, a lot more people are talking about suicide, but we're lacking the resources in preventing it. Since 1994, I've seen the suicide rates drop only to go back up again and actually get higher. In 2022, we were at a record high of 49,500 people died by suicide in the United States, which is about one death every 11 minutes. That's a lot of people. And it's reached its all-time high since 1941. So we're going up. We're not decreasing. We're not decreasing the suicide rate right now. There's probably many reasons for that. I'm going to start with my own profession. Although there's many of us that are in the field that do have training on suicide awareness and prevention, we did not get that training in our undergrad or graduate school. Many therapists, we truly want to help people, but we're not adequately trained in the field of suicide. In school, there's minimal time spent on suicide, especially on suicide assessments and how to work with someone who is suicidal. So that leaves many in the field feeling incompetent, working with individuals who have suicidal ideation. That may sound surprising to some people. It may be surprising to many that as helping professionals, we don't have the adequate training in our undergrad or graduate schools in suicide prevention. It's extremely limited. And it wasn't until 2016 that here in Pennsylvania, we even needed to have any continuing education credits on suicide prevention. Now, We need 1 whole hour of continuing ed credits every 2 years on assessment, treatment, and managing suicide risks. 1 credit every 2 years. That's not enough. 30 years is a long time. 30 years, we could have had a lot accomplished and a lot could have changed. I hoped that we would have had significant changes in the area of suicide and mental health. But just like I was frozen in the CVS, I sometimes wonder, are we frozen when it comes to mental health and suicide? Thank you for listening to Mending Piece by Piece podcast. Hope you enjoyed this bonus episode. And if you did, please be sure to subscribe, rate, and leave a review and share with family or friends. See you next week. And until next time, continue mending piece by piece, healing through grief, one step at a time.